The ship looked like a dead thing, floating in the black sea of space. Pressed her face closer to the observation window of her own vessel. She had seen many broken ships before. The people had been traveling through the stars for thousands of years, and in that time they had found countless wrecks drifting in the empty spaces between worlds. Most of them were old. Most of them were empty. Most of them held nothing but dust and memories. But this ship was different. This ship was human. Felt her two hearts beat faster as she studied the wreck. The vessel was small by standards, barely larger than a transport shuttle. Its hull was covered in deep scratches and burn marks. One entire side had been torn open, and could see the twisted metal reaching out into space like broken fingers. The ship's lights were dead. Its engines were silent. Everything about it screamed that nothing inside could possibly be alive. "It has been drifting for at least 90 days, said Commander Taro, stepping up beside her. He was tall even for a male, his blue-gray skin marked with the ceremonial scars of a veteran soldier. "Our sensors picked it up this morning. It crossed into our territory sometime during the night cycle." 90 days, repeated quietly. She did the math in her head. 90 days without rescue. 90 days in the cold emptiness between stars. Nothing could survive that long in a ship that damaged. "Agreed," Taro said. His voice was flat and certain. "We are dealing with a tomb, not a rescue mission. But protocol demands we investigate any vessel that enters space, especially a human vessel." Understood. They had encountered humans only a few times in their long history. The first meeting had been violent, the second had been tense. The third had ended in a trade agreement that neither side fully trusted. Humans were strange creatures. They were soft and fragile with only one heart and weak bones that broke easily. They needed constant warmth, constant air, constant food and water. They could not survive in vacuum. They could not heal from serious wounds the way could. By every measure, they should have been a weak and forgettable species. But they were not. Humans had spread across dozens of worlds in less than 300 years. They had built cities on planets that should have killed them. They had fought wars against species much stronger than themselves and somehow won. The military had studied human tactics for decades, trying to understand how such fragile beings could be so dangerous. Had read those studies. She had memorized the reports, but she had never actually seen a human in person. Today, even if she only saw a human corpse, would be a first for her. "Prepare a boarding team," Taro ordered. "Full protective gear, weapons ready. We do not know what killed this ship, and we do not know if the threat is still present." "Yes, Commander," said. She turned away from the window and walked toward the equipment room. 20 minutes later, stood at the front of a 5-member team. They wore sealed suits that protected them from vacuum, radiation, and biological contamination. Each team member carried a pulse rifle and a scanning device. Also carried a medical kit, though she did not expect to use it. The airlock doors opened, and they floated across the short distance between the two ships. Suit thrusters fired in small bursts, guiding her toward the gaping hole in the human vessel's hull. She entered the wreck first, as was proper for a team leader. Inside, everything was dark and silent. Activated the light on her helmet. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow corridor filled with floating debris. Papers, tools, small personal items. A child's toy shaped like some earth animal she did not recognize. Everything drifted slowly in the zero gravity, spinning in lazy circles. "Spread out," ordered through her communicator. "Search every compartment. Document everything you find." The team moved efficiently through the broken ship, made her way toward the front, where the control room should be located. She stepped over broken panels and pushed aside floating cables. The air in her suit tasted clean and recycled, but she imagined she could smell the death that must be waiting somewhere in this metal grave. She found the control room door sealed shut. This surprised her. In a ship this damaged, most doors would have failed. Power should have died long ago. There was no reason for any door to remain functional. unless someone inside had sealed it on purpose. Felt a strange feeling in her chest. It was not quite fear, but something close to it. She reached out and touched the door panel. It was cold, even through her gloved fingers. "I found a sealed compartment," she reported. "I am going to attempt to open it." "Be careful," Taro's voice crackled through the communicator. "If there is a survivor, they may be hostile. Remember, humans are unpredictable." Nodded even though no one could see her. She pulled a small device from her belt and attached it to the door panel. The device was designed to override electronic locks. It took only a few seconds to crack the simple human security code. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Raised her weapon and stepped inside. The control room was small. There were 2 chairs facing a wide window that looked out into space. Computer screens lined the walls, all of them dark and dead. In one corner, she saw a pile of empty food containers stacked neatly against the wall. In another corner, she saw blankets arranged into a rough bed. And on that bed, she saw a human. His finger tightened on her weapon. She waited for the human to move, to attack, to do something. But the figure remained still. She stepped closer, her light falling across the human's body. It was a male. Young perhaps, though she was not skilled at judging human ages. He had dark hair that hung across his forehead and pale skin that looked almost gray in the harsh light. He was thin, much thinner than the humans she had seen in photographs. His cheeks were hollow. His hands, resting on his chest, looked like bones covered in paper. He was wearing a simple gray uniform with a name tag attached to the chest. Leaned closer to read it. "I found a body," said into her communicator. "Human male. He appears to have starved to death." "Document and continue searching," Taro replied. Pulled out her scanner and pointed it at the human. She expected the device to confirm what her eyes already told her. She expected it to register no life signs, no heartbeat, no brain activity. Instead, the scanner beeped in confusion. Looked at the readout. Then she looked at it again. "Commander," she said slowly, "I need you to see this." "What is it?" "The human is alive." There was a long pause on the other end of the communicator. "That is impossible," Taro finally said. "Check your equipment." "I have checked it twice. The human is alive. His heartbeat is very slow, only a few beats per minute. His body temperature is far below normal, but he is alive." Stared at the figure on the bed. The human had not moved. His eyes remained closed. His chest rose and fell so slowly that she could barely see the movement. He looked like a corpse, like something that had been dead for days or weeks. But he was alive. "Bring him to our ship immediately," Taro ordered. "Full medical containment. I want answers." Reached down and touched the human's shoulder. His skin was cold even through her glove. She shook him gently. "Human," she said, "can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the human's eyes opened. Had expected many things. She had expected fear. She had expected confusion. She had expected perhaps even violence. But the human simply looked at her with calm, dark eyes. He blinked once, slowly, like someone waking from a long and peaceful sleep. "Hello," he said. His voice was rough and quiet, like rocks scraping together. "You found me." Did not know what to say. She had prepared herself for a rescue mission that was really a body recovery. She had prepared herself to find death, not life. She had not prepared herself for a human who should have been dead 3 times over, looking at her like she was the most normal thing in the universe. "How are you alive?" she asked. The human smiled. It was a small smile, tired and weak, but somehow genuine. "That is a long story," he said. "Do you have time?" Looked at this strange, impossible creature. This fragile being who had survived 90 days in a broken ship, floating alone in the coldest and emptiest place in the universe. This human who should have died but simply refused to. "Yes," she said, "I have time." She helped him stand. He was weak, so weak that she had to support most of his weight, But he did not complain. He did not cry out. He simply leaned against her and took one slow step, then another. As they made their way toward the airlock, realized something strange. She had spent her whole life studying humans. She had read every report, memorized every fact, learned everything they knew about this strange species. But in this moment, holding up this dying man who refused to die, she realized she knew nothing at all. The human called had survived the impossible, and somehow knew this was only the beginning. The medical bay on the ship was cold and white and full of machines that beeped and hummed. Stood behind a thick glass window, watching as the doctors worked on the human called. They had stripped away his gray uniform and covered him with warming blankets. Tubes ran into his arms, feeding him fluids and nutrients. Monitors displayed his vital signs in glowing numbers that made no sense to. She was not a medical officer. She could not read the data, but she could see the confusion on the faces of the doctors, and that told her everything she needed to know. The human should not be alive. Commander Taro stood beside her, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He had been watching for nearly an hour, saying nothing. His silence was heavy and thoughtful. His body was shutting down, one of the doctors finally said, turning to face them through the glass. The doctor was an older female named, her blue-gray skin faded with age but her eyes still sharp. His heart rate was reduced to 3 beats per minute. His core temperature had dropped to levels that would kill any instantly. His brain activity was nearly zero. "But he is alive," Taro said. It was not a question. "He is more than alive," replied. "He is recovering. His body is warming up on its own now. His heart rate is increasing. His brain function is returning to normal. Give him another day and he will be walking and talking like nothing happened." Pressed her hand against the glass. The human lay still on the medical bed, his eyes closed, his breathing slow but steady. He looked peaceful. He looked like someone taking a nap, not someone who had just been pulled back from the edge of death. "How is this possible?" she asked. Shook her head. "I do not know. I have studied human biology. They are supposed to be fragile. They cannot survive extreme temperatures. They cannot go without food for more than a few weeks. They cannot survive without air for more than a few minutes. Everything about them suggests they should die easily." "And yet this one did not die," Taro said. "No, this one did not die." The room fell silent, continued to watch the human, trying to understand what she was seeing. She had been trained to analyze situations, to find logical explanations for strange events. But there was no logical explanation for this. There was only the impossible truth lying on that medical bed. "I want to question him," she said suddenly. "When he wakes up, I want to be the one to talk to him." Taro turned to look at her. "Why?" "Because I was the one who found him, because he spoke to me first, and because I need to understand." Taro considered this for a moment. Then he nodded. "Very well, but I will be watching. And if he shows any sign of being a threat, you will end the conversation immediately." "Understood." Waited. She waited through the night cycle and into the morning. She waited while the human's vital signs slowly returned to normal. She waited while his body temperature rose and his heart began to beat at a steady rhythm. She drank bitter tea and ate nothing, too focused on her task to feel hungry. Finally, just as the ship's artificial lights began to brighten for the day cycle, the human opened his eyes. Entered the medical bay alone. She walked slowly, giving him time to see her, to recognize her. She did not want to frighten him. Watched her approach. His eyes were clearer now, more focused. Some color had returned to his face, though he was still very pale. He tried to sit up, struggled, and fell back against the pillow. "Easy," said. She pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. "You are still recovering. Do not push yourself." "Thank you," said. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "For saving me." "I did not save you. I only found you. You saved yourself." A small smile crossed the human's face. "I suppose that is one way to look at it." studied him carefully. Up close, she could see details she had missed before. There were small scars on his hands and arms, marks left by old injuries. His dark hair was longer than it should be, suggesting he had not been able to cut it in many months. And his eyes, though tired, held something she had not expected. They held calm. Not the calm of someone who had given up, not the empty calm of someone who had accepted death. This was a different kind of calm. This was the calm of someone who had faced the worst and simply decided to keep going. "I have questions," said. "I thought you might. Your ship was damaged, badly damaged. Our analysis suggests the accident happened approximately 90 days ago. Is that correct?" Nodded slowly. "Something like that. I lost track of the exact number after the first month." "How did you survive for 90 days in a ship with no power, no heat, and limited supplies?" The human was quiet for a moment. He looked past the walls of the medical bay, into some distant memory that only he could see. "It was not easy," he finally said. "And it was not pleasant, but humans have a talent for surviving things we should not survive. It is written into our history, into our blood." "That is not an answer." "No, I suppose it is not." Took a deep breath. "Very well, I will tell you." Leaned forward, ready to listen. "When the accident happened, I was asleep," began. "I do not know what hit us, an asteroid maybe, or debris from an old battle. Something struck the port side of the ship and tore through the hull. The explosion killed the captain instantly. It killed the navigator too. The cook was thrown through a breach in the hull and into space." "And you?" "I was in my quarters in the back of the ship. The impact threw me against the wall and knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, the ship was dark and cold and I was alone." Tried to imagine it, waking up in darkness, surrounded by death, with no way to call for help. It was a nightmare scenario. It was the kind of situation that would break most people. "The first thing I did was check the damage," continued. "The front half of the ship was destroyed. Life support was failing. The main power generator was offline. I had backup batteries, but they would only last a few days at most, and I was too far from any planet or station to signal for help." "So you were trapped?" "Yes, trapped with maybe 3 weeks of food, 2 weeks of water, and a few days of power. By any reasonable calculation, I was dead." Felt something strange in her chest. It was not quite sympathy, but something close to it. "But you did not die." "No, because I realized something. The food and water were limited, but the cold was unlimited. Space is very cold, as you know, and cold can be a tool if you know how to use it." "I do not understand." Looked at her directly. His eyes were dark and serious. "Humans discovered a long time ago that cold can preserve things, food, medicine, even bodies. If you lower a human's body temperature enough, their metabolism slows down. Their heart rate drops, their brain activity decreases. They enter a state that is very close to death, but it is not death, it is more like waiting." Felt her heart's beating faster. She was beginning to understand. "You froze yourself," she said. "In a way, yes. I sealed myself in the control room, which was the only compartment that still held air. I ate as little as possible and drank only when I had to, and when I had used up half my supplies, I began the process." "What process?" "I lowered the temperature in the room as much as I could. I wrapped myself in blankets and lay very still, and I let my body cool down, let my heart slow, let my mind drift into darkness." Stared at him. "That should have killed you." "It almost did, many times. The trick is to wake up before you go too far, to pull yourself back from the edge before you fall over it. I set alarms, timers, anything that could make noise. Every few days I would force myself to wake up, eat a little, drink a little, and then go back under." "For 90 days." "For 90 days." Sat back in her chair. Her mind was struggling to process what she had just heard. This human had deliberately stopped his own heart over and over again to stretch his supplies. He had danced on the edge of death for 3 months, pulling himself back each time through nothing but willpower and careful planning. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing that made humans so frightening to the rest of the galaxy. "When I first saw you," said slowly, "I thought you were dead. Your heart was barely beating. Your body was like ice." "I was in the deepest sleep I had ever allowed myself," admitted. "I had run out of food 2 days before. I knew I could not wake up again without starving to death, so I let myself sink deeper than ever before. I decided I would either be rescued or I would not wake up at all. And then we found you. And then you found me." Was silent for a long moment. She had come into this room expecting to interrogate a survivor, to extract information about the accident, about the ship's mission, about any potential threats. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a man who had defeated death itself through nothing but stubbornness and intelligence. "Your people," she finally said, "are very strange." Laughed. It was a weak laugh, more of a breath than a sound, but it was genuine. "I know," he said, "we hear that a lot." Stood up. She needed time to think about what she had learned. She needed to report to Commander Taro and the rest of the crew. She needed to figure out what to do with this impossible human who had done an impossible thing. But before she left, she paused at the door and looked back at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you fight so hard to survive? Most people would have given up. Most people would have accepted death. Why did you keep going?" His eyes met hers, and in that moment saw something she had never seen in any species before. She saw a fire burning quietly in the darkness, a small flame that refused to go out, no matter how strong the wind. "Because I had something important to do," he said simply, "and I was not finished yet." Left the medical bay with more questions than answers. She had learned how the humans survived, but she had not yet learned why he was out here in the first place. She had not yet discovered what mission was so important that this man would die and revive himself over and over again to complete it. That answer would come soon, and when it did, it would change everything they believed about humans. Everything. News traveled fast in the fleet. Within hours of interview with the human, everyone on the ship knew about the survivor. By the next day, every ship in the sector had received the report. By the end of the week, the story had reached the itself. A human had survived 90 days in a dead ship. A human had stopped his own heart to stretch his supplies. A human had defeated death not once, not twice, but dozens of times. They did not know how to react. Some called it a lie. They said the reports must be exaggerated, that no creature could do what this human claimed to have done. They demanded proof, evidence, scientific examination. Others called it a miracle. They said the human must have special powers, some hidden ability that they had never discovered. They wanted to study him, to unlock the secrets of his survival. And some called it a warning. They said this was proof that humans were more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. They said they should be afraid. Watched all of this from her position on the ship. She watched the messages pour in from across the fleet. She watched the arguments and debates play out on her screen. And she watched the human called, who seemed completely unaware of the chaos his survival had caused. 3 days after his rescue, was allowed to leave the medical bay. He was still weak, still thin, still recovering from his long ordeal. But the doctors said he was stable enough to move around the ship with supervision, and so became his guide, his translator, and his protector. She was not sure how she felt about this assignment. On one hand, she was curious about the human. She wanted to learn more about him, to understand how his mind worked, to figure out what made him so different from any creature she had ever met. On the other hand, she was aware of the pressure building around them. Everyone wanted a piece of this human. Everyone wanted their questions answered. The first visitors came on the 4th day. They were scientists from the academy, 3 of them, traveling on a fast shuttle from a nearby research station. Their leader was an older male named, his skin marked with the patterns that indicated high academic status. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed knowledge was the most important thing in the universe. Met them in the docking bay and led them to a small conference room where was waiting. The human sat at one end of a long table, drinking something hot from a cup. He looked up when the scientists entered, his expression curious but calm. "This is him," asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "This is the survivor." "Yes," said, "this is." Walked around the table, studying the human from every angle. He pulled out a scanning device and waved it near his body, reading the results with a frown. "Remarkable," he muttered. "His cellular structure shows signs of repeated trauma. His organs have been stressed beyond normal limits. By all medical standards, this man should have suffered permanent damage. And yet I am fine," finished for him, "or close to fine anyway." Looked at the human with new interest. "You speak our language." "Taught me some words. I learned quickly." "Indeed." Sat down across from the human, his earlier skepticism replaced by scientific hunger. "I have many questions for you, human. Your survival technique is unlike anything in our records. We have experimented with cold preservation for centuries, but we have never achieved anything close to what you describe." "That is because you stopped too soon," said simply. "Explain." Set down his cup and leaned forward. "They are afraid of death. You see the cold as dangerous, as something to avoid. So when you experiment with preservation, you stop at the first sign of risk. You do not push further because you fear what might happen. And humans are not afraid of death." "Oh, we are very afraid of death, but we are more afraid of giving up, more afraid of failing, more afraid of lying down and accepting defeat," smiled slightly. "So when we face the impossible, we do not stop. We keep pushing until we break through or break ourselves." The scientists exchanged glances, could see them struggling to understand this strange philosophy. To them, survival was about careful planning and risk avoidance. The idea of deliberately pushing into danger was difficult to grasp. "Your technique," pressed, "the controlled hypothermia, how did you know it would work?" "I did not know. I guessed. I had read about experiments done on Earth hundreds of years ago. Doctors who had revived patients who drowned in frozen lakes. Soldiers who survived being buried in snow for days. The data suggested that extreme cold could preserve human life longer than anyone expected. I simply took that idea to its logical end." "And if you had been wrong?" "Then I would have died," shrugged as if discussing the weather. "But I was going to die anyway. At least this way I had a chance." Felt a chill run down her spine. The human spoke about his own death so casually, so matter-of-factly. It was disturbing. It was also, in a strange way, inspiring. The scientists asked many more questions. They asked about his heart rate, his breathing, his brain activity during the deep sleep. They asked about the timers and alarms he had used to wake himself. They asked about the psychological effects of spending months alone in the dark. Answered everything with the same calm patience. He did not boast about his survival. He did not try to make himself sound special or heroic. He simply explained what he had done, step by step, as if teaching a class. By the end of the session, the scientists looked exhausted. They had filled their recording devices with hours of data. They had taken samples of his blood, his hair, his skin cells. They had measured everything that could be measured, but could see that they were also confused. They had come expecting to find answers, to unlock the secret of human survival. Instead, they had found something they could not easily explain, something that went beyond biology and medicine. They had found will, pure, simple, unstoppable will. After the scientists left, the military officers came. Commander Taro led them personally. 5 officers in crisp uniforms, their faces hard and suspicious. They did not sit down. They stood around the table, surrounding the human like predators circling prey. "We have analyzed the wreckage of your ship," Taro began without greeting. "We found no weapons, no military equipment, no strategic materials." "That is correct," said. "My ship was not a military vessel." "Then what was its purpose?" "Cargo transport." "Cargo transport." Taro's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe that a human ship wandered into territory by accident, that you were simply lost." "I do not expect you to believe anything. I am simply telling you the truth." One of the other officers, a young female with angry eyes, stepped forward. "Humans are known for deception. You could be a spy. You could be a scout for an invasion fleet. How do we know this is not all a trick?" Looked at her calmly. "If I were a spy, I would have chosen a better cover story than nearly dying alone in a broken ship for 3 months. And if there were an invasion fleet coming, you would have seen it by now." "Then why were you here? What was your cargo? Where were you going?" The room fell silent. Noticed that expression changed slightly. For the first time since she had met him, she saw something like emotion cross his face. Not fear, not anger, something softer, something sad. "That," he said quietly, "is something I will only share when I am ready. Not because I am hiding a threat, but because it is personal, and I do not think you would understand." Taro leaned forward, his voice hard. "You are in no position to keep secrets, human. You are on a ship in space, surrounded by soldiers. We could force the information from you." Met his eyes without flinching. "You could try, but I think you know it would not work. I just spent 90 days dying and reviving myself because I refused to give up. Do you really think threats will break me now?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Held her breath, waiting to see what would happen. Then slowly Taro smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a warrior who had just encountered a worthy opponent. A smile of respect mixed with caution. "You are either very brave or very stupid, human," Taro said. "I have not decided which." "Perhaps both," replied. "Humans are complicated that way." Taro nodded to his officers and they left the room. But before he walked out the door, the commander paused and looked back. "I will give you time," he said, "but eventually you will tell us everything, one way or another." When they were gone, found herself alone with the human once more. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. "You know," she said finally, "you could have just answered their questions. It would have been easier." Shook his head. "Some things cannot be explained with words. Some things must be shown. When the time is right, they will understand. All of them will understand." Wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to demand answers just like everyone else. But something in his voice stopped her. Something in his eyes told her to wait. So she waited. And in the waiting, she found herself starting to believe in this strange human. Not because of what he said, but because of what he did not say. Because of the secrets he kept. Because of the fire that burned behind his calm eyes. Whatever his mission was, whatever cargo his broken ship had carried, it was important enough to die for. And that, realized, was more frightening than any weapon. Could not sleep. She lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the human, about his calm eyes and quiet voice, about the way he had faced down Commander Taro without showing any fear, about the secrets he was keeping. What was so important that he would die over and over again to protect it? The question burned in her mind. It would not let her rest. It would not let her think about anything else. Finally, after hours of trying to sleep, made a decision. She got dressed, left her quarters, and walked through the quiet corridors of the ship. Most of the crew was sleeping during the night cycle. The halls were empty and dim, lit only by soft emergency lights along the floor. Made her way to the docking bay where the human ship was being stored. The wreck had been pulled inside their vessel for further examination, its broken hull held in place by magnetic clamps. Guards were supposed to be watching it at all times, but knew the night shift was always understaffed. She found only one guard, a young soldier who was more interested in his communication device than his duties. Showed him her credentials, told him she was conducting additional research, and walked past without any questions. The human ship looked even worse up close. Had seen it from a distance when they first pulled it in, but standing next to it made the damage feel more real. The torn metal, the burned panels, the exposed wires hanging like dead vines. It was a miracle anyone had survived in this thing for even a day, let alone 90. She found the hole in the hull and climbed inside. The darkness swallowed her immediately. She activated her personal light and moved through the debris, stepping carefully over broken equipment and floating junk. The ship's artificial gravity was still offline, but its magnetic boots kept her anchored to the floor. She had already explored the front sections during the initial rescue, but she had not had time to examine the back of the ship, the cargo area. The cargo doors were sealed, just like the control room had been, but this time did not need to hack anything. Someone had left the doors partially open, as if they had been checking on the contents regularly. Pushed the doors open and stepped inside. What she found made her stop breathing. The cargo bay was small, barely larger than her own quarters, but it was filled, floor to ceiling, with carefully organized containers. Plastic boxes stacked neatly, each one labeled with human writing that could now read thanks to her translation studies. The first box was labeled seeds wheat. The second was labeled seeds rice. The third was labeled seeds vegetables mixed. Moved deeper into the bay, reading more labels: medical supplies, water purification tablets, vitamin supplements, solar panels, farming tools. And in the back corner, protected by padding and secured with extra straps, were boxes with a different kind of label. Children's books, Earth Classics. Educational materials, Basic Science. Toys, ages 3-7. Hearts were pounding so hard she could hear them in her ears. She reached out and touched one of the book boxes with trembling fingers. The plastic was cold and dusty, but through the clear lid, she could see the colorful covers of the books inside. Pictures of animals and children and bright blue skis. This was not a military ship. This was not a spy vessel. This was not even a normal cargo transport. This was a relief ship. Now you understand. Spun around so fast she nearly lost her footing. Stood in the doorway, his thin figure outlined by the light from the corridor beyond. He was dressed in borrowed clothes that were too big for him, and he leaned against the frame like he needed its support to stand. "You should be resting," said. I could not sleep either. Walked slowly into the cargo bay, his eyes moving across the boxes like he was greeting old friends. I knew someone would come eventually. I hoped it would be you. Why me? Because you are the only one who looks at me like I am a person, not a problem to solve. Did not know how to respond to that. She turned back to the cargo, her mind still struggling to process what she was seeing. Where were you taking all of this? Sat down on one of the larger boxes, his breath coming in short gasps from the effort of walking. There is a human colony called New Eden. It is on the far side of space, about 2 months' travel from here under normal conditions. 3 years ago, a plague swept through the colony. Not a natural plague. It was a biological weapon released by another species during a territorial dispute. I have heard of this colony, said slowly. The reports said everyone there was dead. The reports were wrong, or maybe just hopeful depending on who was making them. His voice was bitter. About 3,000 people survived the plague, mostly children whose immune systems were strong enough to fight off the disease. They have been living in the ruins ever since, trying to rebuild with nothing. 3,000 children. And a few hundred adults. Farmers, teachers, doctors who were immune or lucky. They have been sending distress calls for years, but no one comes. The territory is disputed. The risk is too high. The politics are too complicated. Felt sick. She had heard about New Eden. Everyone had heard about it. But the official report said the colony was destroyed, the population wiped out, the planet worthless. No one had mentioned survivors. No one had mentioned children. So you decided to go alone, she said. Not alone. There were 4 of us originally, a small team of volunteers who did not care about politics or risk. We gathered supplies from a dozen different worlds, seeds that could grow in New Eden soil, medicine that could treat the lingering effects of the plague, books and toys for children who had lost everything. And then your ship was damaged. Nodded slowly. We were crossing through space because it was the shortest route. We knew it was dangerous, but we thought we could make it. We were wrong. The impact that destroyed your ship, do you know what caused it? No, it could have been an asteroid. It could have been debris from an old battle. It could have been... Paused, his jaw tightening. It does not matter. What matters is that my died and I was left alone with a cargo full of hope for 3,000 children. Looked around at the boxes again. Seeds and medicine and books. Such simple things. Such small things compared to the vast darkness of space and the terrible cruelty of the universe. And yet this man had nearly killed himself 100 times to deliver them. Why did you not tell us? She asked. When Commander Taro questioned you, when the officers demanded answers, why did you stay silent? Smiled sadly, because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you would stop me. Afraid that your government would see this as a political issue, an excuse to get involved in human affairs. Afraid that the cargo would be confiscated, studied, argued over for months while children starved. We would not do that. Would you not? Looked at her with those calm, dark eyes. I do not know your people. I do not know what they value or what they fear. All I knew was that 3,000 children were waiting for me, and I could not risk anything getting in the way, not even my own life. Wanted to argue. She wanted to defend her people, to promise that they would help, that they would do the right thing. But she thought about the scientists who saw as a research subject. She thought about the officers who saw him as a potential threat. She thought about the politicians who were already arguing about what to do with him. And she realized she could not make that promise, not honestly. What will you do now? She asked instead. That depends on you and on your people. Stood up slowly, using the wall for support. I am too weak to pilot a ship. My own vessel is beyond repair. I cannot reach New Eden alone, so I am asking you, not the fleet, not Commander Taro, just you. What are you asking? Help me. The words hung in the air between them. Simple words, heavy words. Help me deliver this cargo, continued. Help me reach those children before it is too late. I do not care about politics or territories or treaties. I only care about keeping a promise to 3,000 kids who have been waiting for help that never comes. Stood in the middle of the cargo bay, surrounded by boxes of seeds and medicine and children's books. She thought about her duty to her ship, to her commander, to her people. She thought about the rules she had sworn to follow and the orders she was expected to obey. And then she thought about children growing up in the ruins of a dead colony, wondering if anyone in the universe cared about them. I cannot do it alone, she said finally. I am not important enough to make this happen. But you know people who are. Nodded slowly. She did know people. Commander Taro, for all his suspicion, was not a cruel man. Doctor had dedicated her life to healing. There were others on the ship, good people who might be willing to listen if the truth was presented the right way. If I tell them about this, they might still say no. They might, but at least they will know. At least they will have to make a choice. Looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. That is all I am asking. Give them the chance to do the right thing. Give them the chance to be better than I feared. Took a deep breath. She thought about everything she had learned in the past few days, about human survival and human stubbornness, about a man who had died over and over again to deliver hope to dying children. And she made her decision. "Come with me," she said. "We need to wake up the commander." Smiled. It was a tired smile, worn thin by months of suffering and years of fighting for a cause no one else seemed to care about. But it was real, and in that moment understood something important about humans. They did not survive because they were strong. They did not survive because they were smart. They survived because they cared. They cared so much about things that seemed small and insignificant that they were willing to sacrifice everything for them. Seeds, medicine, books. 3,000 children waiting for help. It was such a small thing, really, and yet it was everything. The conference room was silent. Commander Taro sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Around him sat the most senior officers on the ship, along with Doctor and 2 representatives from the High Council who had arrived by shuttle just hours ago. At the far end of the table sat and, side by side, had told them everything. She had explained about the cargo, about New Eden, about the 3,000 children waiting for help. She had shown them recordings from the human ship's damaged data banks, messages from the colony begging for supplies. She had laid out the truth as clearly as she could. And now they were deciding. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Could feel her heart's beating in her chest, could feel the sweat forming on her palms. She had taken a huge risk by doing this. She had gone behind her commander's back, investigated the cargo without permission, and now she was advocating for a foreign national in front of the highest authorities available. If this went wrong, her career was over, maybe her freedom too. But she did not regret it, not for a moment. Finally, one of the council representatives spoke. He was an elderly male named, his skin pale with age but his eyes still sharp. He had listened to everything without saying a word, his expression giving nothing away. "Let me understand this correctly," said slowly. "This human risked his life to deliver supplies to a dying colony, not weapons, not soldiers, seeds and medicine and children's books." "That is correct," said. "And he did this alone, after his died." "Yes." "And he spent 90 days dying and reviving himself to protect this cargo." "Yes." Leaned back in his chair, a strange expression on his face. "This is not how humans are supposed to behave." "I do not understand," said. "The reports we have about humans paint them as aggressive, territorial, and selfish. They fight wars over resources. They expand into territories that do not belong to them. They are supposed to be a threat, not this." He gestured at who sat quietly with his hands folded on the table. The human had not spoken since the meeting began. He had let tell his story, trusting her to do it justice. "Perhaps," said softly, speaking for the first time, "your reports only tell part of the story." Every eye in the room turned to him. "Humans do fight wars," he continued. "We do compete for resources. We do many terrible things that we are not proud of, but we also do this." He gestured at himself at the table around them. "We cross impossible distances to bring medicine to sick children. We die over and over again for a cargo of books. We risk everything for strangers we have never met." Y asked, "What is the purpose?" "There is no purpose. Not in the way you mean. We do not calculate the benefits. We do not weigh the costs. We simply see someone who needs help and we help them, even when it is dangerous, even when it is stupid, even when everyone tells us it is impossible." The room fell silent again. Could see the officers exchanging glances, trying to fit this information into their understanding of the universe. It was like watching someone try to solve a puzzle with pieces from the wrong box. Then Commander Taro spoke. "I have been a soldier for 40 years, he said. His voice was rough, his words slow and careful. "I have fought in wars. I have killed enemies. I have watched friends die. In all that time, I thought I understood what courage meant. I thought I understood what strength looked like." He looked directly at his expression thoughtful. I was wrong. True strength is not about winning battles. It is not about defeating enemies. True strength is about refusing to give up on what matters most, even when you are alone, even when you are dying, even when no one is watching. He stood up, and everyone else in the room stood with him. This human has shown more courage than most soldiers I have ever known, Taro continued. He has sacrificed more than most warriors ever will, and he did it not for glory or power, but for children he has never met. Taro turned to the council representatives. I recommend that we escort this human to his destination. I recommend that we provide whatever supplies he needs to complete his mission, and I recommend that we do it immediately, before another day passes without those children receiving help. And the other representative exchanged a long look. Then slowly they both nodded. The council agrees, said. We will assign a fleet escort to the mission, not just one ship but 3. We will also provide additional supplies from our own stores. Medicine, food, whatever is needed. Felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to show weakness in front of her superiors, but she could not stop the smile that spread across her face. Thank you, she whispered, thank you. Bowed his head. When he raised it again, his eyes were wet as well. I do not know how to repay this kindness, he said. I came here expecting suspicion and hostility. I expected to be treated as an enemy, as a threat. Instead, you have shown me that your people are capable of the same compassion that drives my own. Smiled, a rare expression on his ancient face. Perhaps that is the lesson here, human. Perhaps we are not so different after all. Perhaps the things that divide us are smaller than the things that unite us. Perhaps, agreed. The meeting ended, and the preparations began immediately. Within hours, the ship was buzzing with activity. Engineers worked to transfer cargo to a functioning transport. Medical officers prepared additional supplies from their own stores. Communications officers sent messages ahead, alerting the ships that would join the escort. Found herself standing in the observation deck, watching the stars drift past. She had not slept in over a day, but she did not feel tired. She felt alive, more alive than she had felt in years. Joined her a few minutes later. He moved slowly, still recovering from his ordeal, but there was a new energy in his steps. Hope, perhaps, or relief. You did this, he said, standing beside her. You made this happen. I just told the truth. You did the hard part. No, the hard part was surviving. But surviving means nothing if no one knows why. You made them understand. You gave my story meaning. Shook her head. I think you are giving me too much credit. And I think you are not giving yourself enough. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Out there somewhere was a colony called New Eden. 3,000 children were waiting, not knowing that help was finally on the way, not knowing that a stranger had died over and over again for them, and that an alien fleet was now coming to complete his mission. What will you do after this? Asked. After you deliver the cargo. Thought about it for a long moment. I do not know. I have spent so long focused on this mission that I never thought about what comes next. Maybe I will stay on New Eden for a while, help them rebuild, teach the children how to read the books I brought. That sounds nice. It does. He paused, then looked at her. What about you? Will you get in trouble for what you did? Laughed softly. Probably. I broke several rules, went behind my commander's back, conducted unauthorized investigations. She shrugged. But I do not regret it. Some rules are worth breaking. That is a very human thing to say. Perhaps you are rubbing off on me. They both smiled at that. The fleet escort assembled over the next several days. 3 warships, plus their own vessel, formed a convoy that would carry and his precious cargo to New Eden. It was the largest humanitarian mission they had ever undertaken for a human settlement. And it had all started with one man in a broken ship, refusing to die. On the day of departure, a small crowd gathered in the docking bay to see off. Commander Taro was there, along with Doctor and many of the officers who had once viewed him with suspicion. Even the scientists had come, their skepticism replaced by something like admiration. Stood before them looking healthier now but still thin, still carrying the marks of his ordeal. He did not give a speech. He did not make grand gestures. He simply bowed to each of them in turn, a sign of respect that crossed cultural boundaries. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Then he walked up the ramp and into the transport ship, disappearing from view. Watched him go, feeling something strange in her chest. Sadness, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of everything that had happened. Commander Taro stepped up beside her. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than I would have expected." "Thank you, sir. This mission will change things, not just for us but for our relationship with humanity. For the first time, we are seeing them as more than competitors or threats. We are seeing them as people. Is that a good thing?" Taro was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I believe it is. Understanding each other is the first step toward peace, and peace in the end is what all beings truly want." The transport ship's engines fired, and it lifted off from the docking bay. The fleet moved into formation around it, 4 ships heading out into the vast darkness of space. Watched until the ships were nothing but distant lights among the stars. Then she turned and walked back into the corridor, ready to face whatever came next. The human called had turned their world inside out. He had shown them that strength could be soft, that courage could be quiet, and that the greatest heroes were not always the ones who won battles. Sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones who refused to let go. And that was a lesson they would never forget.